This is my presentation for a lesson that I did when doing my observation for CNI 200 in Arley High School for a freshman class on Shakespeare. My professor allowed me to do my own presentation on Act 3, Scene 1 of Romeo and Juliet, and I thought this was a good opportunity to describe character flaws and tragic flaws to these English students and get myself acquainted with this new program called Prezi. So as you can see, this is just the opening title. It's Romeo and Juliet, Act 3, Scene 1, when all hell breaks loose. To start off with the presentation, I wanted to go over what character traits and tragic flaws are. Essentially, many of the characters in Shakespeare's plays have tragic flaws, which are just vices that ultimately demise a protagonist in a play or literary work. And I wanted to get the students to ask themselves what Shakespeare is trying to say about these qualities or vices within each characters. To do this, I decided to compare and contrast two different characters in the work, which are Tybalt and Romeo and Juliet. At this point, I would ask the students in the class how they would describe Tybalt. When I actually gave this presentation, they gave a lot of really good answers. They described him as proud, very proud of his family and the Capulet name, even though he could not really figure out why he was supposed to be mad at the Montagues. He vehemently hated them and took every opportunity he had within the play to start a fight or try to kill them. So they described him as proud as well as angry. And these, which are what we would describe as the tragic flaws of Tybalt in this instance. He was extremely proud of his family name and he was always looking for a fight. The first words that even came out of his mouth in the play are turn Benvolio, look upon my death. So you get a kind of tone for how you describe his character and his characteristics that you could mark as tragic flaws in the play. Contrasting that, I'd ask them how to describe Romeo, who is the true protagonist and the one who has the most tragic flaws within the play. They're very quick to say that he was extremely romantic, and then I asked how could this be a bad thing? And the students began to ask themselves, well, is it really a good thing to fall in love with every girl that you meet, or to just endlessly pursue everything on a whim? And they agreed that in some instances, to the severity of Romeo, it could be a very bad thing. Additionally, we got onto his impulsiveness and how he never thinks anything through within the play, which likens him in many ways to Tybalt, in that neither of them have any forethought towards their actions, and they're very much living in the moment, which can be bad quality. So then we go over to the death of Mercutio, which is by far the trigger in the play of when everything begins to turn. And then we go over the motivation of Romeo when he avenges Mercutio, such as why do you think he felt so bad about this, given that he was Mercutio was stabbed under Romeo's arm as he was trying to break up the fight, as he continually does throughout the play. He had to examine his motivations for his recourse. And Mercutio's famous monologue within the play, where he gets at some of Shakespeare's best puns, where he says, "No, 'tis not so deep as a well, nor as wide as a church door, but 'tis enough, 'twill serve as 'twill serve. Ask for me tomorrow, and ye shall find me a grave man." So Shakespeare's humor really comes out during the play, but the most important part of this would be the end of his monologue, where he says, "Why the devil came you between us? I was hurt under her arm." So Mercutio is actually blaming Romeo for his death at this point, as he intervened in the duel and ultimately he died because of it. So Romeo is beginning to feel guilty about this. He's the one that led to his best friend's death, although indirectly, and he's only trying to help. He becomes consumed with guilt and anger and ultimately lashes out. And this is essentially the turning point. Romeo initially starts off as sort of the lover, not a fighter type in the play, and is very friendly with everyone and is always avoiding conflict, even in the lines leading up to this, where he takes a significant amount of verbal abuse and character defamation from Tybalt willingly, because he's already married Juliet, and I believe he says something along the lines of, I love thee more than you may know at this point. I love thy name, Capulet, and I will not fight you." So essentially, once Mercutio dies, Romeo starts slipping and becomes consumed by guilt and rage towards Tybalt. He doesn't consider his actions. He doesn't consider the fact that the prince will have Tybalt executed for his crime, especially since Mercutio is related to the prince, and everyone has already been warned under penalty of death to not fight in the streets. But instead of letting justice take its course, Romeo takes the law into his own hands and seeks out Tybalt to slay him. So we have a character that's initially good, that is a romantic, that is in love, and begins a slow descent into essentially the dark side when provoked. And I found this a good opportunity to extrapolate upon character flaws and have students begin thinking about them in a wider context. And this part of it went over really well, as I was able to relate literary terminology to pop culture references, especially ones that are popular among high school students. Star Wars seems to never get old, and Darth Vader is a good example of a character flaw, ultimately leading to someone who's, although starts out as a benevolent character, into a slow descent and ultimate demise or corruption. After that, I asked the students an open-ended questions, such as what is Shakespeare's use of these character or tragic flaws trying to bring about or illustrate in a broader context? What is he specifically saying about impulsiveness and anger and pride and excessive romanticism? And how can we learn from that today? Essentially, why are we still teaching Shakespeare to students some 300 years after the original manuscripts were written and performed? In other words, how can we ever relate to a story in early modern English about two warring families in Italy that has almost nothing to do literally with the work we live today? And I began to draw some similarities between the broader context of the works of Shakespeare and the morals that they try to instill on their audience, and why they're so prevalent and still being read today. And then I brought up a discussion about what other characters have tragic flaws, and invited students to bring in different characters from different films, different books, different music, or real life people that ultimately have tragic flaws that lead them to become bad people, even with the most noble intentions. This brought about some good discussions talking about The Lord of the Rings and Gollum as the exemplar of greed, and that tragic flaw ultimately destroying him. It brought up a lot of talk about Harry Potter, and a lot of talk about movies, which the students seemed to clearly relate to the most, which I found out was pretty useful. When you can actually get students involved in something that applies to them or they have good knowledge of, which in this case would be movies, you can actually describe and illustrate character flaws in a much broader context, which allows better comprehension and learning on the student's part. And that was my Prezi demonstration on Romeo and Juliet, Act 3, Scene 1. This program wasn't very hard to learn. It only took me about 2 hours and about half an hour to bring up this presentation, which, including discussion time, gave me about 45 minutes of direct presentation to the students and allowed for them to do group reading of the scene as a whole. After this, I opened up questions and got some feedback. My cooperating teacher really liked the idea, and I taught her how to use it afterwards. And I'm going to continue to use this if I continue to see success. So thanks.